Using the same color, fill in the other two leaves on your line drawing. You can see that there is a large variation in tone between our two greens. This is achieved mainly by adding more water to the mixture. The quinacridone gold we added is giving this a little bit of brightness. Now that the leaves are painted in, I'm adding more Viridian to the mixture to deepen it slightly. To add some interest to the foliage, I'm dropping in small amounts of paint by touching my brush down in areas along the bottom of the leaf. This wet paint will mingle with the wet background color, and you will see granulation. I'm also using some of this darker shade as a glaze over the bottom of the leaves for continuity. Next, I'm adding some areas of quinacridone gold as well, mixing the colors together so that the leaves do not look so flat. We'll need to let this painting dry again before we add the final details. Now that this area of the painting where the leaves overlap is dry, we'll add a small detail so that the top leaf seems to be in the foreground of the painting. To do this, I'm using the dark green mixture and putting a small amount on the brush. Come in and apply a light glaze of color to the back leaf, working around the base of the upper leaf. Start with a lighter shade and add more paint as needed. Continue the color around the stems and around the top edge of the leaf. Finally, for balance, add a dark glaze to the bottom of your other leaves and use clear water to blend. Enjoy using these sweet yet complex colors to create brilliant lilacs. These light-filled watercolors are a perfect addition to a flower lover's palette. The thistle's spiky shapes and intriguing colors make a spectacular subject in watercolor. We'll paint the intriguing foliage and vibrant bloom with a trio of specially selected color. Let's take a look at the watercolors we'll be using. Manganese violet is a mid-range purple with remarkable granulation. This deep tone is a rich violet with flecks of darker tones as the pigment granulates into the texture of your paper. Add water for a light lilac-toned wash. Chromium green oxide is a deep, mossy green. This watercolor is opaque, and you'll notice its increased density and coverage when applied at full strength. In washes, this rich color has a subtle granulating quality. Italian burnt sienna is a natural pigment roasted to bring out a wonderful reddish brown. This earth tone is brighter than a traditional burnt sienna and granulates on the paper, giving a nice texture in washes. Begin your thistle painting by loading your brush with manganese violet watercolor. For the tops of the flowers, use small strokes to fill in around the pointed areas that make up the bottom of the thistle. This will make a dark area at the bottom of each bloom where the purple meets the green portion of the plant. Once these dark violet areas are painted in, add a little more water to your mixture to create a lighter shade of purple. This is the fun part of the painting. Starting in the center of the bloom, pull the paint upward with a quick brushstroke to create the spiky petals of the thistle. Make this shape by keeping enough wet paint on your brush to create the full stroke of the petal, and by using a pointed round brush. Use the line drawing to guide the general shape of your brushstrokes, but don't worry if you vary slightly from these lines. The shape of the flowers will look more natural if you allow some of the brushstrokes to be spontaneous. Be sure to include the lower thistle and paint around the leaf in your line drawing. Next, we'll make a deep shade to paint the bottom of the thistle leaves. Move some manganese violet to an empty well on your palette. Next, add some of the chromium green oxide and finally, add some of the Italian burnt sienna watercolor. The resulting shade will be a rich neutral tone with just a hint of green. You may need to balance the color by adding more violet or more green paint. Wherever the leaves are folded over, on the places where you see the underside of the leaves, paint in this deep color. Keep the leaves spiky at the end. Everything on this thistle should be very pointy. At first, this might look kind of strange because we've just been painting the bottom of these leaves. This dark green will complement the brighter green we'll add later for the main parts of the plant's foliage. Continue to work your way down the plant, filling in all the areas where the leaves bend and turn. Next, use a small amount of the same dark neutral to fill in a shadow at the base of each thistle blossom. After those shadows are placed, load your brush with chromium green oxide and blend the color onto your paper, all the way to meet the violet portion of the thistle. For now, fill in the outline of your drawing with color. Later, once these areas are dry, we'll come back in and add the details in all these areas. Next, use chromium green oxide to paint in areas of the stems and leaves. Get the paint nice and wet by adding water with your brush. Beginning at the top of the stem, work your way down to the bottom. Add more paint to your brush as needed to keep an even shade of green. As you paint this color, you should notice that it's a bit brighter than the green we used earlier for the underside of the leaves. After you paint the stems, add more water to the chromium green oxide to create an even paler shade of green. Use this light color to paint in the top portions of the leaves, giving contrast to the shadow areas. The point of your brush will help to carry the watercolor pigment into the points of the leaves. As you work your way around the thistle, vary the tone of your paint by adding more water or working more paint into your mixture. You can also remove some paint that's already been applied to the paper by pulling it away with a damp, clean brush. These minor variations in the quality of your colors will add character to your painting. Some of these leaves are quite large, and you can vary the tones of your paint throughout the entire leaf. Now that we've added all of the color to the thistle painting, it's time to come back in to add some texture and details. Italian burnt sienna is a wonderful earth tone that can be used to add both details and an interesting color to the painting. Be sure to work plenty of water into the paint to create a flowing consistency in your watercolor. Too much water and the paint will be very runny and difficult to control. Too little water will result in a stiff paint that doesn't readily flow onto your paper. Once you have a good consistency, use this color on the dry, green areas of the thistle. Add hatch marks and texture to these globe-shaped areas of the flower to add all the sharp structures and textures on these flowers. This color also makes a great addition to the shadow areas of the leaves. Use a light glaze of color over the underside of the leaves, covering some of the areas we previously painted to add a mahogany tone and liven up these shadows. Next, create a mixture of chromium green oxide with Italian burnt sienna. The resulting hue will be a natural-looking deep green. Use this mixture to add lines and markings to the stem of the thistle, giving the plant some structure and texture. Also use this color to add veins to the leaves, outlining areas through the center of the leaves and radiating outward. Now darken up any shadow areas that might need another layer of color. The more you layer color on the underside of the leaves, the deeper the shadow will become. Finally, add a little more paint near the base of each flower to create a deeper shadow. Now our thistle painting is complete with layers of vibrant color and spontaneous brushstrokes for a charming country flower. Painting sunflowers brings together cheerful colors and bright tones. To create this brilliant blossom, we'll use a range of tones that mix together perfectly.